Hello, my name is Farrell D. Moore, and I'm your host of this episode of Write, when we'll discuss the third dragon of creative writing, Part 6. Now to begin. At that moment, the woman who dared question economy as a great rule of writing is seized to be dragged to the pit. I see the color of the sky itself painted with the brushstrokes of angry orange. Off in the distance, where the buzzards had circled over the carcass of the dead dragon of separation, I see dark clouds fermenting. The air around us cools, and I shiver in the face of this ominous portent. No one else seems to notice. All eyes are fixed on the fire-haired woman who is about to be dragged away and thrown into the writer's pit. None move to defend her. Who are we to question economy in writing? We have, after all, been told that it is the only way to enter the city of writer's gold. From your wooden throne next to Ferdinand, you are looking out into the assembly of writers, staring at the woman who has dared challenge Shrift, the master strategist of Ferdinand the Dragon Slayer. Your mouth is slightly agape, and there is bewildered expression on your face. At the edge of the assembled crowd, the woman is now being dragged away to be thrown into the pit. Shrift has ordered her that anyone who does not worship economy in writing above all else is not fit to enter the writer's city of gold. There is an unspoken objection in your face, as though you want to shout that there are other considerations, sometimes more important than economy itself. But you have not the will to speak your mind. I wonder about this too, but I am no more confident than you, and therefore say nothing. I do not wish to end up in the pit. The woman is struggling, her eyes wild with fear, her long red hair flying about as she demands to stay. But the three writers who are taking her away simply grip her more tightly and shove harder. I turn my head from the sight. She cries out, but she has questioned economy, so I pretend not to hear her. When I look at you again, I see you are staring back at me. This time, you look down, too. Whether you are ashamed of me or yourself or both, I cannot say. Shrift is oblivious to the woman's plight and continues his lecture. The great Ferdinand, slayer of dragons, does not intervene. The second secret of writing the assembly line way I call the cookie cutter technique, he says. What is a cookie cutter technique? It is very simple and very efficient. We all agree that are only certain ways of only certain types of characters, and we all agree to make use of them and them only. There is one saying that Andiron the prophet heard a great man from the future proclaim in one of his visions, and it was this: they can have any color they want as long as it is black. That man, says Andiron, will someday be hailed by all of his time as a genius. Who better to learn the assembly line way from that its founder? Do you all agree? I'm still afraid to speak, as are the rest of the assembled writers. We are all surprised, including Shrift himself, when you, seated behind him, ask in a resolute voice, and what was this man? Was he a writer? Shrift's mouth opens in disbelief. A question from you? Why would you of all writers question him? You are, after all, the woman seated on a wooden throne next to the great Ferdinand, slayer of the third dragon of creative writing, and the man thought by all to be destined someday to become the greatest writer in all the world. As Shrift turns to gawk at you, you repeat your question. Was he a writer? After recovering his composure at being asked such a question by you, Shrift answers, No, my lady. According to Andiron, he was not. And what was his trade, you ask? There is an edge to your voice that I have never heard before. The great Ferdinand smiles broadly, displaying a mouthful of perfect teeth. Tell her, Shrift, he encourages the bold man. It is an interesting question. What exactly was his trade? Allow me to answer, my lord, says Andiron, the prophet, who stands up straight and addresses the assembled crowd of writers with this answer. The creator of the assembly line way made complicated metal mechanisms that moved. Mechanisms, I ask, without thinking. What has that to do with writing? I cringe when I see Shrift's reaction. From beneath hairless eyebrows, his eyes bore down on me like a starving hawk on a plump field mouse. Perhaps if I further question the assembly line way, I too will be forcibly taken away by my fellow writers and dropped into the pit, along with the woman who had questions. It is the principle, young lad, says Shrift. He speaks to me as though I am not old enough to ask experienced questions. I bridle at his tone, but do not wish to jeopardize my chances to enter the writer's city of gold, where all writers are richly rewarded. Listen carefully, all of you, he continues. The founder of the Assembly Line Way realized that for a person or an enterprise to be successful, parts, whether or complicated mechanical contraptions or stories, must be interchangeable. Characters must be easy to understand and standardized so that one need only change their names and use them again in another story, but with a different name. Plots, too, must be similar to each other so that these characters can be dropped in and out of them with ease. We will all use these standardized characters and plots. Why waste time? Why waste our valuable time creating uniquely different complex characters and plots when we can all standardize? Think of the time and thought we will save. Do you see the beauty of the Assembly Line Way? Just a handful of cookie-cutter characters and plots we can all use, and they will all fit together easily because we don't put our hearts and souls and inspiration into them. So these stories will not be unique creations. Now, as discreetly as I can, I cast quick glances to my left and right to gauge the reaction of my fellow writers. They are doing the same. None of us, it seemed, had any idea how to respond. The cookie-cutter way was not the way of the sacred dragons of creative writing. Writers were once sacred torchbearers who carried our creative flames into the darkness of human pain and suffering, showing the light of triumph to heroes and heroines who overcame towering obstacles. Under the Assembly Line Way, we would all use the same cookie cutters to punch out our characters from a recipe of fictional dough so that our combined cast of characters would be the same. We would then arrange them as we would, making sure to use plots punched out in the same manner. Aha, I shout. Then we will be assemblers of things that were standardized and predictable, and hence the name the Assembly Line Way. We no longer have to think, just assemble. Now on the platform, Shrift claps his hands in my honor. Overhead, the sky purples with vitriol. Bravo, lad, he says. Now you have grasped the essential beauty of the cookie cutter. We will make plot diagrams and character arcs, and we will all use the same thinking when writing. Why, we will mix these parts and assemble them to create stories that are easy to make as a stick figure. Only a fool would choose the Dragon Way over the Assembly Line Way, as you can now plainly see. We will not create new realities, we will only assemble old ones. Creativity is painful, time-consuming, and exhausting. Assembly of cookie-cutter characters and plots is so much easier and faster with all the energy left over from us not creating. We can write many cookie-cutter stories and will make much more money than writing only 1 or 2 or 3 stories over the course of a lifetime. More stories will mean more money, and we will then be able to enter the city of Writer's Gold. Hooray, several writers shout. I begin to clap, but stop when I see that you, seated next to the great Ferdinand, seem distraught. I wonder at that moment if you are disappointed in me. Is that why you left me alone in the cave? Was it because I was too slow to learn the lesson of the second dragon? Ferdinand is much more handsome than I, and he is famous. I see you look past me to the assembly of writers below you, and I notice how your face brightens. In the course of my life, I will later tell our children, I have only 3 epiphanies and 4 important realizations. At that moment, I have my first important realization. I see that you are not on stage next to Ferdinand because you love him or because you want to enter the city of Writer's Gold. You are up there because, as the consort of the great Ferdinand, you are admired by all. At that moment, I remember my mother telling me, one afternoon, seasons ago, that a girl needs very much to be wanted, much more than loved. A woman needs to be loved more than wanted. Standing here in this strange village of writers and slain dragons, I understand the meaning of my mother's words. I see that you are still young and need admiration. I'm still young and I have never been attentive enough. You do not care about the city of Writer's Gold as much as I. You care that you are admired. On stage you are admired. Wealth and admiration must be powerful afflictions to poetic souls such as ours, I think. I wonder how a writer can write well when their mind is always thinking of wealth and fame. But I have no answers. and return my thoughts to Schrift. Now quickly, he says, I will tell you about the same differently. The third secret to the assembly line way. Perhaps it is the change in temperature, or the gusts of wind that dry my eyes like demons sucking away breath, but my head begins to hurt, as though a giant is squeezing it between his two great hands. You may be asking, continues Schrift, how it is that if we use cookie-cutter characters in simplistic plots, that our readers will not get bored. But worry not, fellow writers, because you do not need to be creative to be a successful writer and enter the writer's city of gold. Creativity is a dragon way. We do not need it. How is this possible, I ask? Schrift stares contemptuously down at me, and I feel nauseous. My heart pounds against my chest like a prisoner, trying to escape, and my own skin feels more like a costume. I am not well. Perhaps I have been too long traveling and am falling into delirium. My vision wavers like vapors in heat, and I see Schrift's face transform into that of a leering, fanged, pale green goblin with high-pointed ears. A viscous, milky fluid leaks from the corner of his mouth. In the distance, I hear the flapping of giant wings. Sweat breaks through my pores, and my skin is soaked. Then the moment is gone, and Schrift is only Schrift again. The nausea passes, and I feel myself again. Schrift looks at me curiously, but then begins again. We replace creativity with simply putting all the cookie-cutter characters and plots we have agreed upon into a pot, stir them up, and simply reach in and take out a plot, a few characters, and maybe a standard theme, and there will be our story. It will take very little work, and we can do it over and over again, and our readers will be none the wiser. Simple random mix-ups will replace creativity. Don't think, mix and match. Creativity is wasted on readers. Creativity takes time, effort, and sustained commitment. These things prevent us from making many stories, and we must write many stories to make much wealth so that we can enter the city of writer's gold. And then a giant roaring wind sweeps down from the sky and blasts away Schrift's words. Trees bend down like supplicants before an altar, and our clothes fluff and flap as we stagger to keep upright. Schrift is forced 3 steps backwards, almost knocking you from your chair. A gust of leaves is ripped from their branches and thrown into his face like flowers on a grave. From somewhere up above, in a bubbling cauldron sky, I heard a terrifying, bellowing cry that shakes the very bones of my body. Ferdinand leaps to his feet and takes out his mighty sword of commerce. He points it toward heaven and shouts something, but his oath is puny in the face of the tempest coming down at us. I look toward the sky, covering my eyes from the howling wind, and I see a magnificent dragon, blue-orange in color with wings like a ship's sail flapping. Hooked talons grasp and unclasp as it comes hurtling down at us. Its eyes are pinpoints of angry fire, and from its wicked jaws and horned nostrils blows hot mist. In foreclaws, at the end of arms, long and sinewy and shiny, bright with scales, it holds a mighty flaming sword. People scream and scatter before the hot mist blasting the village as though the dragon speeds down at us, getting larger and larger with each second. Its great shadow overcasts us like a judgment, and I cower to the ground. It screams its war cry, like the dead crying for life, and I look up to see it roll back its sword, preparing for a mighty swing. It is flying directly at you. The great Ferdinand is screaming now, his mouth stretched and distorted. His sword of commerce lays abandoned on the platform. I see him grab you suddenly and thrust you between him and the flaming eyes and hot mist of the dragon. With the realization that the dragon will cut through you to get to Ferdinand, I scramble to my feet and run to the platform. But I am too late. The dragon's terrible fiery sword arcs down toward you, and you scream. This ends today's presentation of Write, and tune in next time when we have another episode of the Dragons of Creative Writing.